You don't hear it at first. You only feel it, the lightest tremor beneath the floorboards of your life, a pressure that isn't quite pain, but won't let go. You keep moving because you've trained yourself to move, brush your teeth, answer the message, show up, be kind. But when the room finally empties and the screens go dark, a small voice steps forward inside you and asks the one question no one can outrun. What did they do to you, and who will you become now? In Stoic language, this is the moment your ruling faculty, the part of you that observes and chooses, takes the bench. It doesn't rage, it evaluates. And the first verdict it renders has nothing to do with them. It's about you. You refuse to become what hurt you. Because of that, the real justice begins where the Stoics always said, it would within. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind turns every impression into its own material. You touch fire, you learn warmth and danger. You touch betrayal, you learn how to guard your peace. But the ones who hurt you touched something far more volatile, their own conscience. That's the first punishment they face, the silent trial conducted at 2 a.m. without a jury, without applause, without a sympathetic crowd. No one escapes this court. No man is free who is not master of himself, Epictetus taught. The one who wronged you may look unbothered in daylight, but night is honest. The mind closes its doors to performance and opens its archive. And in that archive, every message left unanswered, every promise broken, every moment, they turned your vulnerability into a toy, returns as evidence. You don't present it, their memory does. You learn quickly that you don't have to argue your worth. Your silence turns out to be sharper than any reply. It is not passive, it is principled. Seneca would call it the discipline of desire and aversion. You decline the bait, you refuse the show, you protect the inner citadel. That refusal does two things at once. First, it spares your spirit from the corrosive vanity of revenge. Second, it hands their conscience a mirror they cannot put down. Your absence becomes a teacher. It teaches them what your presence once concealed, how much peace you brought, simply by being steady. It teaches them the cost of crossing someone who was loyal when no one was watching. It teaches them that the universe is a ledger that doesn't settle on social media, it balances in the quiet. This is not superstition, it's cause and effect. The Stoics spoke of living in harmony with nature, not in trees and lakes, but in the moral shape of reality. When you harm what is good, trust, fidelity, dignity, you disrupt your own alignment. At first, the misalignment feels like excitement, a little rush of getting away with it, a private narrative in which they're clever and you're naive. But then the second wave arrives, the feeling of being watched by one's own mind. They scroll for distraction and find your name in the spaces between the words. They turn up the music and your silence grows louder. They win a small victory and it tastes like ash. The punishment is precise, not public humiliation, not ruinous scandal, just an internal weather system that refuses to clear. This is what the transcript called silent justice, and it is older than any law. You meanwhile begin your apprenticeship in emotional intelligence. You stop needing the courtroom of public opinion. You stop rehearsing speeches for people committed to misunderstanding you. You start choosing where your attention lives. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Marcus wrote, you adapt the line for your hour. If it does not serve your peace, do not pursue it. If it does not build your future, do not feed it. You practice the smallest dignities, drinking water slowly, making your bed, returning to breath when your thoughts sprint, because dignity in the small makes dignity in the large possible. And with each dignified act, the grip of their story loosens. You are not the wound. You are the healer standing beside the wound, choosing how to proceed. There will be memories that try to pull you back walkways of expectation where you used to perform your pain. You'll pass a familiar street and feel the entire narrative surge again, the message you never received, the apology withheld, the scene you imagined performing. This is where you practice Stoic separation. You tell yourself this is an impression, not a command. You let the wave pass. You let it climb your chest and then recede, because waves do that when you stop fighting them. Each time you refuse to rehearse the grievance, you reclaim a portion of your attention, and attention is the currency of your destiny. Meanwhile, the law of consequence continues its work in places you will never see. They may laugh with friends. They may post something bright. They may even seem to thrive. But good fortune without peace is just a shinier cage. The first collapse is always inward. It begins as a question that interrupts their laughter. Why doesn't this feel like a win, and evolves into a pattern they cannot explain, the missed sleep, the restless appetite, the dread that arrives for no reason and refuses to leave. The Stoics would say that vice carries its own penalty. Not later now. Not because a deity is furious, but because the soul cannot prosper against its own knowledge. Your work is not to watch them suffer. Your work is to become too whole to require it. In practical terms, that means rituals that do not depend on their remorse. A morning reading that steadies you, an evening walk that exhales the day, a boundary that needs no announcement because it is embodied. It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them, Epictetus taught. You choose judgments that keep you sovereign. This ended, therefore, space has opened. This hurt, therefore, I am learning tenderness with spine. This silence, therefore, I can hear myself again. You will know the balance is shifting when you stop wanting an audience for your pain. You simply carry your peace like a lamp that does not perform its own light. It just illuminates whatever room you enter. And somewhere invisible to you and irrelevant to your path, their own lamp flickers under the weight of what they chose. The first punishment was always the most intimate, the conscience they cannot mute. The first victory was always the quietest, the dignity you refused to abandon. Your silence was never empty. It was a presence disguised as absence, a decision that looked like retreat, but was in fact strategy. You could have shouted your truth, slammed your anger on the table, demanded explanations from those who owed you none but took everything. Instead, you chose the Stoic path, restraint. And in that choice, your silence became a mirror they could not turn away from. At first, they celebrated your withdrawal. To them, it felt like victory, proof that they had broken you. Proof that their betrayal had gone unanswered. Proof that you lacked the courage to fight. But they misread your stillness. Silence is not always surrender. Sometimes silence is the sound of a fortress being built around your peace. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "Be like the rock against which the waves break, and it stands firm." That is what you became, a rock. And every wave of deceit, arrogance, or mockery they threw against you shattered into spray and returned to them as nothing but foam. But for them, your silence became unbearable. In the quiet, there is no distraction from truth. A noisy argument would have given them material to cling to, a way to justify their actions. See, they're overreacting. They're emotional. They're unstable. But when you refused to supply them with excuses, when you refused to play the part of the wounded and vengeful victim, all they were left with was a reflection of themselves. And reflections can be crueler than any confrontation. This is where Stoicism reveals its deepest power. Seneca wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. By holding your tongue, you proved your strength. You didn't need to mimic their chaos. You didn't need to announce their failures. You simply removed yourself. That removal spoke volumes. I will not destroy myself, trying to make you see what you refused to honor. Your silence was your final argument, and it could never be defeated. They began to feel it in small ways first. A laugh that rang hollow, a party that felt empty, a night where sleep abandoned them. At the edges of their joy, your absence pressed in like a shadow. They looked at the faces around them, and something was missing. That something was you, not your words, not your energy spent explaining, but your calm. Your ability to make chaos feel like order. Your quiet loyalty that steadied their life even when they mocked it. Without it, everything became louder, harsher, shallower. And so their conscience, already restless, found an accomplice in your silence. It became the amplifier of their guilt. It forced questions into their mind. Why did I do that? Was I the one who destroyed something sacred? Did I just lose the only person who truly understood me? These questions are knives forged from reflection, and silence sharpens them daily. You meanwhile discovered the beauty of disengagement. By stepping out of the arena, you stopped bleeding for their entertainment. The Stoics called it withdrawing into yourself, not in self-pity, but in sovereignty. You began pouring your attention into acts of building rather than acts of proving. And in doing so, you demonstrated what they could never grasp. Silence is not emptiness, it is creation. The quiet hours became your workshop, your temple. Every sunrise you built resilience where pain had tried to nest. Every night you reclaimed energy once wasted on explaining yourself. In contrast, their quiet turned suffocating. They replayed conversations. They reread old messages. They stood in places once warmed by your presence and felt the cold. This is what the transcript called the mirror they can't look away from. Your silence didn't scream. It reflected. It reflected their betrayal, their cowardice, their selfishness, their loss. And because you didn't hand them the easy script of angry victim, they had nothing to fight against. They could only wrestle with themselves. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics already knew. Guilt unaddressed becomes anxiety. Anxiety ignored becomes shame, and shame unhealed becomes collapse. They may not confess this collapse to the world. They will still post, still smile, still pretend. But deep within their silence echoes differently than yours. Yours is peace. Theirs is torment. This is why silence is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is emotional intelligence in its most elegant form. You understood that arguing with someone determined to misunderstand you is like speaking to a locked door. So you stopped knocking. And in stopping, you revealed the truth that door wasn't closed because you weren't enough. It was closed because they lacked the courage to open it. Over time, silence shifts from being a defense to being a declaration. It says, I was the blessing, and I refuse to bless you any longer. It says, you cannot weaponize my loyalty anymore. It says, you mistook my calmness for weakness, but now you see it was my strength. Silence is the most haunting answer, because it offers no closure, no final word to twist. It simply leaves the guilty alone with themselves. And here is the paradox: the quieter you became, the louder their conscience grew. They laughed louder to cover it. They chased distractions harder to outrun it. They spoke more to silence it. But at night, when the world withdrew and only their thoughts remained, your silence pressed in. And in that pressing, it showed them who they had become, not strong, not free, but imprisoned by their own betrayal. In the end, your silence didn't just mirror their actions, it magnified them. And that magnification is more punishing than any revenge you could have plotted. Because words fade, confrontations get forgotten, but silence, once it sinks in, echoes forever. Peace is never loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks, nor does it demand recognition. It slips quietly into your life when you choose dignity over conflict, self-respect over validation, and stillness over noise. For those who hurt you, peace is the very thing they forfeited when they struck against you. They believed that by lying, betraying, or mocking your loyalty, they were winning something: control, dominance, or a fleeting sense of power. But in truth, they were trading away the most precious resource any human soul can hold: the serenity of an untroubled mind. Karma, the Stoics would say, is not some mystical avenger waiting in the clouds. It is the natural consequence of choices that misalign with virtue. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that what injures the hive injures the bee. When they injured you, your trust, your loyalty, your dignity, they didn't just injure you. They injured themselves. They severed the very bond that stabilized their own soul. And so while they thought you would spiral into chaos, it is they who began to unravel. At first, the loss of peace is subtle. They notice they can't sit still in quiet rooms. They feel an ache of unease that no distraction can numb. They chase pleasures, but the joy is shallow. They laugh louder, but the echo feels empty. They start to notice that their victories taste flat, that their achievements feel like sand in their hands. This is the exchange they made your calm presence for their restless mind. They thought they could harm you and walk away untouched, but nature doesn't allow that kind of imbalance. The scales correct themselves not with noise, but with steady subtraction. Meanwhile, you begin to recognize your peace as your most valuable currency. You see clearly now what the Stoics always taught: that wealth, reputation, approval, even companionship can vanish. But your inner tranquility is the only possession that cannot be stolen unless you hand it over. Epictetus was blunt: if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In your case, you had to be content with being misunderstood. They mistook your silence for weakness, your forgiveness for desperation, your calm for naivety. But in reality, you were simply guarding your peace, refusing to waste it in battles that did not deserve you. Consider the real-life story of a woman who lost a friend in the darkest season of her life. The friend abandoned her without a word. At first, the betrayer seemed carefree, unaffected, moving on as though nothing had happened. But months later, her conscience began to gnaw. She couldn't sleep. Songs they once loved together became daggers of memory. Quotes about loyalty burned like accusations. No punishment was needed. Her mind punished itself. That is the law of peace once lost. It cannot be faked, only earned. For you, this becomes a turning point. You no longer beg others to understand your worth. You no longer plead with them to see the damage they caused. You simply let the silence stand, knowing that their own soul will be the most merciless judge. This doesn't mean you wish them harm. On the contrary, it means you step aside and let the universe, or as the Stoics would say, let nature do its work. You understand now that revenge is redundant when someone is already at war with themselves. The irony is sharp. They assumed you would live in turmoil while they thrived. But what has unfolded is the opposite. You are the one rebuilding, finding joy in small rituals, discovering the strength of solitude, and protecting the light of your soul. They are the ones who, in the absence of your calming influence, stumble into inner disorder. Without your stabilizing presence, life for them grows noisy, uncertain, full of cracks. There comes a moment when they begin to sense it. They look back and realize that life felt steadier when you were near. Their world felt calmer when you were part of it. But that presence, the peace you carried, was never theirs to exploit. It was a gift, and once betrayed, it withdraws. Now they are left to face the void their actions created. Seneca said he who does wrong is more unhappy than he who suffers it. At first glance, that sounds strange. How could the betrayer be more unhappy than the betrayed? But now you see it clearly. You suffered, yes, but suffering refined you. You learned. You became stronger, wiser, untouchable. They, on the other hand, live with a gnawing loss that has no cure. They carry the weight of knowing they harmed someone who meant them no harm. That weight corrodes from within. This is why peace lost becomes chaos gained. For you, the path forward is lightened by discipline, resilience, and the steady practice of guarding your inner citadel. For them, the path forward becomes haunted by restlessness, anxiety, and a conscience they cannot mute. They can post the pictures, they can tell the jokes, they can pretend nothing is wrong. But every quiet moment reminds them they traded peace for pride, and pride always collapses. In your silence, you did not just protect your own peace. You forced them to see what happens when it's gone. And that realization, that peace is priceless and they lost it, is the first and deepest echo of karma. Life has a way of closing doors that no human hand can reopen. At first, the ones who wronged you don't notice. They still believe themselves untouchable. They think they've escaped, that their betrayal left no trace. They walk forward convinced the story ended when you stayed silent. But in truth, the story had only just begun. For what the Stoics called the logos, the rational order of nature, never leaves imbalance unaddressed. The doors of fortune once open to them begin to close one by one. Not with spectacle, not with thunder, but with quiet precision. They notice small things first, a conversation that doesn't lead anywhere, a friend who stops answering as quickly, an opportunity that falls through at the last moment. They call it bad luck. They blame timing. But behind the curtain of excuses, life has begun to withdraw its favor. Epictetus would have called this the will of nature. The betrayal of loyalty, the violation of trust, these are not trivial. They cut against the grain of the world itself. And so the universe corrects not always as punishment, but as alignment. You see this correction clearly because you've stepped outside the game. You no longer need to chase outcomes or prove their downfall. You watch with the detachment Marcus Aurelius practiced when he wrote, "Observe how all things change into one another and acquire the power of enduring it." You observe not to celebrate, but to understand. The doors they once walked through so easily, friendships, influence, admiration, now feel heavier, harder, less inviting. And though they laugh louder inside, they sense the ground shifting beneath their feet. The Stoics believed that vice carries its own penalty: betrayal, dishonor, cruelty. These are seeds planted in the soil of the soul. For a time, the plant looks healthy, green, even thriving. But underneath, the root is rotting. And when the root rots, collapse is inevitable. This collapse often appears in subtle, everyday forms. A career that once flowed smoothly begins to stall. The admiration of peers turns into suspicion. The supportive relationships dry up. The trust they once leaned on evaporates. Slowly, the doors of connection shut, and they are left knocking with no one willing to answer. Consider how the transcript put it. Opportunities dry up. Connections grow cold. People start walking away for reasons they can't explain. This isn't coincidence. It is the quiet law of cause and effect. They touched what should have never been violated: your loyalty, your love, your dignity. By doing so, they broke something sacred, and life, like a physician who doesn't announce every remedy, simply began to remove them from paths they were never meant to walk. Meanwhile, you discover the strength of letting doors close without resistance. At first, you felt the urge to knock, to chase, to reopen what was lost. But with time you realize what Marcus meant when he wrote, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs." You see that every door closing for them is also a door of protection closing for you. By leaving them to their path, you avoid being dragged into the fallout meant for them. Their locked doors are your shield. This is not vengeance. This is recalibration. It is life itself refusing to support someone misaligned with truth. And though they may not understand it, they feel it. They sense that their world is not as open as it once was. They may try to force opportunities, manipulate people, or craft false images of success. But behind the image, the reality grows clearer. The easy path they once took for granted now resists them at every step. You, on the other hand, begin to feel the opposite. The doors that are meant for you open more easily. Not because life owes you, but because you've aligned yourself with virtue, with patience, with resilience, with peace. You no longer chase closed doors. You no longer beg to be understood. You accept. And in acceptance, you find new paths, illuminated new opportunities emerging. What closed for them opens for you, and the contrast speaks louder than any revenge ever could. This is the quiet storm of justice. It doesn't arrive with spectacle. It doesn't announce itself. But it is relentless. Like water wearing down stone, life continues its correction until the imbalance is gone. They may not even admit what they feel, but they know it. Every closed door whispers back to them the memory of what they lost when they hurt you. Every missed chance reminds them that blessings cannot be betrayed without consequence. And here you learn the greatest discipline of all: do not interfere with the doors life closes. Don't knock, don't beg, don't force. When life removes someone from your path, it is protection, not punishment. If you chase what is being withdrawn, you will inherit the fallout never meant for you. Trust instead the silence of closing doors. Trust the recalibration that doesn't need your hand. And remember, what feels like their victory was only the setup. The real correction comes later, quietly, perfectly timed. There comes a moment when life no longer shields them from their own reflection. At first they believed the silence you offered was weakness. They convinced themselves you were too soft, too forgiving, too unwilling to confront them. But silence, as you've already learned, has a way of becoming the harshest of teachers. For when the noise fades, when their distractions grow stale, life sets up a mirror. And in that mirror, they begin to taste the bitterness of the very pain they once served you. This is the most poetic form of justice reflection, not revenge. The Stoics would remind you that nature doesn't operate out of spite. It operates out of symmetry. Marcus Aurelius said, "What happens to every man is for the good of the whole." Injustice is never isolated. It throws the entire balance out of order. And so the balance restores itself often by handing people the same experiences they once inflicted on others. The one who abandoned you in your darkest hour, they will one day feel forgotten by those they trusted most. The one who lied and deceived, they will find themselves surrounded by people whose words are hollow, whose promises evaporate in the light of day. The one who made you doubt your worth, they will wake to mornings where self-doubt clings like a shadow, suffocating their confidence, no matter how loudly they pretend otherwise. This is not revenge, it is education. The universe is not punishing them on your behalf, it is teaching them through lived experience. Seneca wrote, "The way is steep at first, and the climb hard, but the summit is beautiful." For them, the climb is reversed. At first, the descent feels like triumph. They believe they have moved on, that they've left you behind. But with time, The steepness of their own choices presses upon them. The summit they thought they reached crumbles beneath their feet, and they realize the ground is unsteady because it was never built on truth. Real life is full of these stories. Someone cheats thinking they've found greener pastures only to be betrayed in turn. Someone ridicules another's vulnerability only to find themselves later mocked when they reveal their own. Someone exploits another's kindness only to wake one day desperate for kindness that never comes. These repetitions aren't coincidence. They are mirrors, deliberate, precise, humbling. For you, this realization becomes liberating. You no longer crave the sight of their downfall. You no longer wait for them to acknowledge what they did. You simply trust that reflection will do its work. And while it does, you reclaim your energy for what matters, building a life beyond the wound. You no longer carry the weight of hoping they get what they deserve. Instead, you carry the lighter load of knowing you no longer need to be their judge. But make no mistake, the reflection they face is not painless. In fact, it is often harsher than any punishment you could have designed. Because when life mirrors back what they once did, there is no escape. They can't blame coincidence. They can't point to you. They can't explain away why every relationship feels shallow, why every moment of joy is shadowed by unease, why every attempt at trust collapses under suspicion. Deep down, they know. And knowing is a torment words cannot soothe. This is where Stoic wisdom saves you from bitterness. Epictetus taught, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." You understand now that your healing does not require watching them fall. Your peace does not depend on their suffering. Instead, your power is to step forward, to live in alignment with virtue, to let your life become proof that you were never broken, only refined. The irony is that their reflection becomes their prison, while your silence becomes your liberation. They mocked you for being sensitive, for caring too much, for being loyal to the wrong person. Yet those very qualities, tempered with discipline, became your strength. They taught you tenderness with boundaries, loyalty with wisdom, love with clarity. They taught you the discipline of letting go. And in letting go, you gained what they lost: peace, growth, elevation. Picture this: one day they sit alone, replaying the past. A name comes up in conversation, a song plays, a place reminds them of you. Suddenly, the mirror appears again, and for a moment, they feel what you once felt: confusion, abandonment, doubt, longing for something that cannot be repaired. They taste the medicine they once prescribed so carelessly. And in that moment, they understand. Not fully, perhaps, not humbly, but they feel the weight of it nonetheless. And you are no longer bound to their story. You don't need to witness this scene to know it is real. You simply keep walking. Because you've learned that karma is not your business. Growth is. Reflection belongs to them. Liberation belongs to you. Every collapse begins quietly. From the outside, it looks as though nothing has changed. They post pictures, share jokes, make plans. They appear whole. But deep inside, something has begun to unravel. Like a tree whose roots have rotted, the branches still sway in the wind, the leaves still shine in the sun, but the foundation beneath is hollow. And sooner or later, without warning, the entire structure falls. This is how the Stoics described the nature of vice: it corrodes from within. Seneca once wrote that a guilty conscience never feels secure, even if no one else knows. That insecurity eats away at them slowly. At first, it's a faint restlessness. Then it becomes sleepless nights, strained relationships, unexplainable failures. And finally, it grows into a collapse they cannot hide, not from others, and certainly not from themselves. The transcript gave an image of this. The branches may still look green, the leaves still sway in the wind, but underground, the decay has begun. What was once sustained by your presence, your loyalty, your calming influence, your steady energy is gone. They thought they had discarded you. What they really did was discard the very roots of stability that held their life together. In the modern world, this collapse often takes the form of subtle misfortunes. A promotion that seemed certain slips away. A relationship that once felt thrilling grows cold. A network of friends that used to provide validation begins to fracture. They blame stress, bad luck, or the cruelty of others. But deep down, they know the rot began when they chose to harm the one person who brought them peace. They interfered with the natural order, and the order quietly withdrew its blessing. You meanwhile begin to notice the difference in your own life. While their world grows shallow and unstable, yours deepens. You wake up to mornings with more clarity. You no longer carry the weight of chasing after what broke you. You invest in small habits, in your own growth, in your own healing. The very pain they gave you becomes your soil, and from it new roots begin to grow stronger, deeper, unshakable. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig. That digging is what you're doing now while they are left grappling with the hollow space their choices created. And here lies the paradox. You were the one they tried to break, yet you are the one who is rebuilt. They were the one who thought themselves strong, yet they are the one collapsing. The collapse doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes with small cracks, forgotten joy, strained laughter, trust that never settles. Their conscience torments them with whispers. You had something real and you destroyed it. You lost a blessing you'll never find again. Real stories echo this truth. A man once boasted about leaving behind a kind, patient woman who stood by him through hardship. He mocked her silence, called her boring, believed he deserved more. Years later, after a series of betrayals and failed attempts at love, he confessed to a friend, "I didn't realize she was the only one who ever truly cared for me. I thought she was weakness, but she was the root of my stability. And now she's gone." His collapse wasn't sudden. It was slow erosion, a gradual decay that began the moment he dismissed her worth. This is why the Stoics urged us to act with justice, not because of fear of punishment, but because injustice poisons the doer before it wounds the victim. Epictetus said, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger." Those who hurt you never turned inward. They blamed outward. And now their own failings surround them like shadows they cannot escape. But your task is not to watch their downfall. Your task is to remember the lesson: never build your peace on someone else's pain. Never trade dignity for momentary triumph. Never believe that betrayal can sustain a life. For just as their collapse began quietly, your rise began quietly too. And the contrast will speak louder than any revenge ever could. One day their collapse will be visible. Others may notice. They may whisper, something feels different about them. Their energy is off, but you won't be there to witness it. You'll be too far ahead, rooted in your own growth, surrounded by the fruits of the discipline you chose. The rot of their betrayal will have consumed them, while the soil of your healing will have nourished you. And that difference, that gap, will be the clearest proof that justice, silent and precise, has already done its work. There is a temptation in you, one that every wounded soul has faced: the desire to see them fall, to watch with your own eyes the unfolding of their consequence. You imagine the day when they come crawling back, when they finally admit their wrongs, when their pain is visible and undeniable. But Stoicism whispers a different truth. It is not your duty to witness their downfall. It is your duty to rise above it. Epictetus said it plainly. If someone does you wrong, the greatest punishment you can inflict on him is to remain just yourself. That is the heart of reflection, not revenge. When you choose to stay true to yourself, your dignity, your values, your peace, you become untouchable. Their downfall, if it comes, is no longer your story. It belongs to them alone. Life's justice rarely operates on your timeline. You may not see their nights of torment, their failed attempts at happiness, their restless thoughts when they lie awake replaying memories of you. You may never witness the doors that close for them, the relationships that turn shallow, the sense of hollowness that stalks them. But you don't need to, because justice is not for your entertainment, it is for your growth. In fact, if it came too quickly, it would not serve you. If you saw them punished immediately after harming you, you might cling to the hope of their collapse instead of stepping into your healing. You would stay entangled, watching, waiting, obsessed with their fate. But when justice delays, you are forced to release them. You are forced to focus on yourself, and in doing so, you grow. That delay is not denial, it is protection. It keeps you from becoming addicted to the sight of their ruin, which is no better than being addicted to their presence. And yet reflection comes for them all the same. The liar is surrounded by liars. The betrayer is betrayed. The manipulator falls into webs of manipulation. The abandoner feels the sting of being forgotten. They don't recognize it at first. They call it bad timing or bad luck or the cruelty of the world. But eventually, life's mirror grows too clear to deny. One morning in the quiet, a thought pierces them. Is this how I made them feel? That realization lands harder than any confrontation ever could. For you, this is the moment of liberation. You no longer need proof. You no longer need to check their social media, ask mutual friends, or seek updates. You accept what Marcus Aurelius taught: the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. That is enough. To live peacefully, to build quietly, to rise above that, is the truest form of power. There are countless stories that prove this. A woman once abandoned by her husband for someone more glamorous, stayed silent, healed in private, and rebuilt her life. 5 years later, his new life collapsed. He was left alone, bankrupt, estranged from his children. She never responded to his desperate messages. Why not out of bitterness, but because by the time his collapse arrived, she had already risen too far. She no longer needed to see him broken. Her peace was her justice. This is why Stoicism demands restraint. When you refuse to interfere in life's correction, you protect yourself from inheriting their chaos. If you chase them, if you demand apologies, if you try to force them to feel guilt, you absorb the very storm meant for them. But when you step back and stay silent, life recalibrates without your interference. Their reflection arrives unannounced, undeniable, and unavoidable. And when it does, you won't even be watching. You'll be too busy living, too busy cultivating your peace, nurturing your growth, building a life that makes their shadow irrelevant. Their reflection is their story. Your rise is yours. So remember this: it was never about revenge. It was always about reflection. You didn't need to curse them. You didn't need to expose them. You didn't need to prove them wrong. You simply had to survive their storm so they could walk into one of their own. And by the time they face that mirror, you'll be untouchable, not out of spite, but because you chose peace. That is the quiet genius of life's justice. It doesn't shout. It reflects, and reflection always finds its way home. There is a truth they never understood while you were still near. Your presence was not ordinary. It was a blessing, rare and irreplaceable. They mistook it for background noise, the kind of quiet support that would always be there no matter how they treated it. They thought peace was weakness, that loyalty was naivety, that forgiveness was desperation. And so, blinded by arrogance, they gambled away what was most sacred, the irreplaceable gift of your presence. Now, in your absence, the realization begins to gnaw at them. They laugh with new companions, yet the laughter feels thinner. They pursue new relationships, but none hold the same depth. They surround themselves with admirers, but admiration without sincerity only echoes as emptiness. They search for the calm you once brought, but instead of peace they find noise. They crave the anchor they once ignored, the quiet strength they once dismissed, the stabilizing energy they once mocked. Marcus Aurelius warned himself never to take for granted what fortune places beside you, for it can be gone in an instant. They ignored this wisdom, and now they live its consequence. For you were not simply another person in their story, you were the presence that steadied it. You didn't just offer love, you embodied constancy. You didn't just speak kindness, you carried peace wherever you went. And in betraying you, they didn't just lose a relationship. They lost the ground beneath their own feet. Think of the countless times they mistook your patience for boredom. You listened when no one else would. You stayed when others left. You forgave what others would have condemned. And yet they treated your loyalty as though it were disposable. They assumed they could always return, that your light would always wait for them. But life has no obligation to preserve blessings squandered, and so your presence once taken for granted is gone. The haunting begins here. They walk through crowds and feel alone. They succeed on paper, yet feel hollow inside. They try to replicate your energy in others, but all they find are shallow echoes, people who mirror their dysfunction instead of soothing it, who demand instead of give, who bring noise instead of calm. They realize perhaps too late that you were not ordinary. You were extraordinary, and they mishandled what was extraordinary. This realization is heavier than guilt. Guilt is about actions I did wrong. Regret is about consequences, I lost something good. But what they feel now is deeper, a recognition of identity. They whisper to themselves, I lost the safest place I ever had. I hurt the one who loved me most. I shattered a blessing, and it will never return. That recognition doesn't fade. It grows louder with time. And you no longer need to carry the weight of proving your worth. Their recognition becomes its own testimony. You don't need to post reminders of how valuable you were. Their memory supplies them. You don't need to return to show them what they lost. Their emptiness reminds them every day. You no longer have to be their mirror. Life itself has taken that role. The Stoics taught us to measure wealth not by possessions, but by what we can live without. And here lies the difference. You discovered that you can live without them. You grew. You healed. You rebuilt. They, however, discover that they cannot live without what you carried. And because they destroyed it, they must now live haunted by the knowledge that the one thing they crave, your presence, is the one thing they can never reclaim. There are stories that echo this lesson again and again. A man once confessed, years after losing the woman who loved him through his cruelty, that she was the last person who truly cared. He realized too late that his success, his social circle, his fleeting pleasures meant nothing without the calm, genuine care she brought. He had wealth, but no depth. He had company, but no connection. His life was full, but empty. Why? Because he lost the blessing he once mocked. That is the weight of irreplaceable presence. They don't miss you because you begged them to stay. They don't regret because you punished them. They miss you because without you, life itself feels incomplete. and the haunting will follow them not for a day, not for a season, but for a lifetime. You, on the other hand, step forward with quiet dignity. You don't announce yourself. You don't seek revenge. You simply become untouchable, not because you built walls, but because your peace has grown too sacred to allow the same betrayal again. And that quiet evolution is the most devastating truth of all. They didn't just lose you. They lost the blessing that once made them whole. Regret is a strange creature. It doesn't storm the gates with anger, nor does it knock politely at the door. It seeps in silently at unexpected hours, when the laughter dies down, when the bed grows cold, when the face in the mirror feels foreign. At first it feels like guilt, but guilt fades when rationalizations arrive. It wasn't that bad. They'll get over it. Everyone moves on. Yet over time, the justifications wear thin, and what remains is heavier, darker, more enduring. This is not guilt. This is regret. And regret doesn't just sting, it reshapes the very sense of self. Seneca wrote that the worst punishment is not what others impose upon us, but what we impose upon ourselves. Those who hurt you may have once lived unbothered, mocking your silence as weakness. But silence has its own way of echoing. It repeats in their memory as absence, as a missing piece of the puzzle that no new person, no distraction, no achievement can replace. They replay conversations in their heads. They revisit places that once carried your presence. And every time the same thought claws its way back, I lost something sacred and I can never get it back. At first they try to numb it. They drown regret in distractions, work relationships, temporary pleasures. But regret is patient. It hides in the background, waiting for the quiet moments. In those moments, the full weight descends. Not only do they remember what they did, they recognize who they became in doing it. And that is the sharpest wound of all. It's not just that they betrayed you, it's that they betrayed the better part of themselves. Think of the man who once scoffed at his partner's loyalty, calling her too sensitive, too emotional. Years later, he confessed through tears, "I didn't realize she was the only one who ever loved me without an agenda." His collapse came not from losing her, but from realizing that in mocking her tenderness, he had turned into someone cruel, someone shallow, someone he no longer respected. That is the nature of regret. It forces the betrayer to face themselves. And that confrontation is relentless. They may still wear masks in public, but masks are heavy. They slip. Their friends sense something is wrong, though they can't explain it. Opportunities slip through their fingers, though no one can pinpoint why. The truth is, simple life no longer supports a person who has betrayed its design. The regret becomes part of their energy, and energy never lies. People feel it. Doors close. Connections fade. Their world shrinks not because you cursed them, but because regret has made their spirit smaller. Meanwhile, your silence evolves into strength. What once felt like emptiness now feels like clarity. You've learned not to beg for closure because closure is theirs to seek, not yours to provide. You've learned that peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of alignment. You rise not in arrogance, but in calm. And as you rise, their regret deepens, for the distance between you and them becomes unbridgeable. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best way to avenge yourself is not to become like the wrongdoer." You have embodied this. You did not mirror their cruelty. You did not become bitter, manipulative, or cold. You healed. You grew. And now their regret is sharpened by contrast. While you ascend into a version of yourself they cannot reach, they descend into a version of themselves they cannot escape. The haunting of regret is not only about what they lost, it is about who they are forced to admit they became. They wake to mornings where self-doubt is constant. They look back at memories that once felt powerful, now hollow. They attempt to recreate what they had with you, but every attempt feels counterfeit. They live surrounded by people who mirror their dysfunction instead of healing it. And every shallow connection reminds them of what they threw away. You no longer need to prove anything. Their regret does that for you. And the most painful part for them is knowing that no apology, no explanation, no desperate attempt at return can undo what has been done. Time only widens the gap. By the time they are ready to face the truth, you are too far gone, healed, elevated, unreachable. This is why regret is heavier than guilt. Guilt says I shouldn't have. Regret says I can never undo this, and in that realization, their conscience becomes their punishment, their memory becomes their torment, and their silence becomes unbearable. You were their blessing. They destroyed it. And now all that remains is the shadow of what could have been haunting them in every quiet moment. They thought your silence was weakness. They thought your refusal to fight back meant you had surrendered. What they never realized is that your silence was sacred. It was your shield, your weapon, your transformation in progress. And now, while they remain entangled in the consequences of their choices, you have risen into a strength they cannot touch. This is the ultimate reckoning, not their collapse, but your elevation. At first they seemed untouchable. They gloated, convinced they had won. They mistook your withdrawal as proof that you were broken, defeated, powerless. But over time, their certainty began to crumble. Life's mirror turned against them, showing them the very wounds they once inflicted. Betrayers became betrayed. Liars became deceived. Manipulators became manipulated. They learned painfully that the world reflects back the energy they give. And you became untouchable not through noise but through quiet growth. Marcus Aurelius urged himself to be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. That is exactly what you chose. Instead of chasing revenge, you chased discipline. Instead of wasting energy on bitterness, you invested it into healing. Slowly, you built a life rooted in dignity, purpose, and clarity. And in doing so, you discovered the most profound truth: your peace was not just preserved, it was multiplied. The people who once mocked your silence now live haunted by theirs. Their nights are restless. Their relationships feel shallow. Their victories taste hollow. They don't admit it aloud, but they feel it deeply, an emptiness that grows every time they remember what they lost. They scroll through old conversations, replay your words, revisit the past in search of comfort. But the past is gone, and the blessing they once mishandled is no longer available to them. Your silence became their condemnation, but it also became your liberation. You didn't just survive the storm they thought you would break under, you learned to sail it. You didn't become bitter, though you had every reason to. You didn't mirror their cruelty, though it was tempting. You chose a higher road, and that road led you somewhere they can no longer follow. That is why you are untouchable now. Not because life spared you pain, but because you turned that pain into wisdom, resilience, and light. The Stoics would call this the discipline of assent, choosing not to give your mind to what diminishes you. You no longer dwell on their downfall. You no longer seek proof of their suffering. You don't need to. Because their reckoning is already happening in ways unseen, while your rise is visible in every choice you make toward peace. Your life itself becomes the answer to their betrayal. And here is the most humbling truth for them: your growth terrifies them more than their downfall terrifies you. They expected you to remain broken, stuck in the chapter they left you in. But instead, you rebuilt yourself into someone stronger, wiser, and freer than ever. Now, even if they wanted to return, they couldn't reach you. Not because you are cruel, but because you have outgrown the world where they belong. This is the essence of karma in Stoic philosophy. It is not about watching enemies burn. It is about the law of alignment. When someone betrays what is good, trust, loyalty, love, they misalign with the order of nature, and nature corrects itself. For them, the correction arrives as chaos, regret, and doors closing. For you, the correction arrives as peace, purpose, and doors opening. The same universe that disciplines them blesses you because you chose to remain true to virtue. So let them wrestle with their silence. Let them face their mirrors. Let them sit with their regret. You no longer need to bear witness. You no longer need their apology. You no longer need revenge. Because the greatest proof of all has already unfolded. They lost you and you rose. Their reckoning was never your responsibility. Your rise was always your destiny. And now you walk forward untouchable, rooted in peace, guided by wisdom, elevated beyond reach. Not because they failed, but because you refused to. Not because karma destroyed them, but because silence built you. This is your victory, calm, dignified, eternal. You've walked through the silence, the shadows, and the storms. You've seen how betrayal sets in motion a chain of consequences far greater than any revenge you could have crafted. And now, standing at the end of this reflection, you can finally see what Stoicism was trying to teach. All along, the true power was never in making them pay. It was in becoming untouchable yourself. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again, the best way to avenge yourself is not to resemble the wrongdoer. You chose not to mirror cruelty with cruelty, deceit with deceit, betrayal with betrayal. You chose to preserve your peace, even when it cost you the comfort of being understood. That decision, repeated silently every day, became your victory. For those who hurt you, karma was never lightning from the sky. It was their own conscience, their own restless nights, their own slow realization that they destroyed something sacred. They thought they had ended your story, but really they had ended their own peace. Their reckoning arrived not as thunder, but as emptiness, a hollow space where your presence used to be. And in that void, they learned what Stoics always knew: no one escapes the weight of their own actions. For you, the reward is quieter, but infinitely greater. It is the unshakable calm of knowing you didn't lose yourself in the fire. You didn't let their chaos infect your soul. You became stronger, wiser, more aligned with what truly matters. And now you no longer crave their downfall. You don't wait for apologies. You don't look back for closure. Your life itself is closure. Your peace is proof. So let them carry their regret. Let them face the mirror that never lies. And as for you, keep walking forward. Build the life that once felt impossible. Breathe deeply, knowing that you are not defined by the betrayal, but by the resilience that followed. Your silence spoke louder than any words, and your growth became the one outcome they never saw coming. This is the Stoic truth. Justice is not about dragging others down. It is about refusing to sink with them. The ones who hurt you have their reckoning. You have your rise. And in the end, that rise is the most unshakable proof that you were never broken. You were preserved, protected, and prepared for something greater. So take your peace, carry it like armor, and remember this: the war is already over, and your rise has only just begun.